Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
So it's Ron Crabtree here with another edition of MetaPod, where I bring in thought leaders from around the world to talk about their best stuff around the three common challenges that manufacturing and tangible goods companies face: the forever labor shortage, digital transformation, digitization of work, AI is in that conversation very strongly, and then finally, just needing to do more with less resources, people, logistics, and cost and expense to get things done. And I'm really happy to have Martin Rowan joining us here today, and he's going to be drilling into something I see as an ongoing challenge. For many years, I was involved with implementing ERP systems back in the 80s and 90s, and in particular. And then since then, I've worked with a number of organizations that struggle with getting the real value out of their ERP systems and even helping them, stand up sales, inventory, and operations planning functionality for the first time and stuff like that. So ERP, as part of that whole digital transformation challenge, is one of those ongoing things that everybody kind of faces. I'm going to have Martin introduce himself here in a moment. That his real specialty is around SAP, but I would argue that if you could cross off SAP and put in the name of any ERP system, and you would find the things that Martin's going to talk about to be quite helpful. So if you have direct or indirect responsibility for supply chain operations, financial performance, if you've invested as heavily in SAP or some other ERP system that seems like we're still using spreadsheets and doing workarounds to get things done, and you're having some real challenges around improving service levels and getting a lot more value out of your investment in ERP and other enterprise level applications, then I think you're going to find this extremely helpful. So with that, Martin, tell us a little bit about you.
Hey, good morning, Ron. This is amazing. Thank you. That was such a good introduction. I really appreciate that. Interestingly enough, I've been doing this now for 20 plus years. And 20 years ago, we thought this was pretty novel, and this is probably going to only be a problem for the next 5 or 10 years. And now we're 20 years into it and realize that people still have the same issues that they had 20 years ago. And I think the reality about that is so appealing to why we do what we do, is that we're really there to try and reveal the hidden value in your technology, hence the name as an organization, because we believe that the technology works, probably for most companies, even if they may not think so themselves. But there are underlying issues that cause people not to get the value out of it, as you called out earlier. And this does transcend for sure across ERPs. We have a particular specialization to focus on SAP because it's such a large market in its own. But you can apply this to pretty much any ERP. And as a matter of fact, probably any technology. I will lean in on AI a little bit today as well. We'll talk a bit about how these ERPs have such a big impact on AI, especially agentic AI. A lot of companies aren't getting any value out of it for the reason that the ERP is not functioning appropriately. So we'll leave it at that for now, but we'll get back to it, I'm sure.
All right, that's awesome. And I agree with you. If the underlying enterprise infrastructure, ERP being the house of tremendous amounts of data and information, transactional data, and all kinds of stuff, we got to have good data to feed agentic AI or any other AI platform if we expect to get any real value out of it. So the underlying backbone that ERP provides is super important. So in the next part of the podcast here, I'm interested in, Martin, if you can unpack 3 different key areas that you would offer as a diagnostic, 3 different areas any organization that's using ERP and maybe feeling that they're not getting the value they should. What should we be looking at? Why should we look at it? Pretend that the audience is a novice, right? I'm on the board of directors. I work in a different function, not directly involved. I'm an operations person or an engineering person or whatever. Now, if I'm going to kind of walk down the hall, right, and ask some questions and kind of peel back the onion here a little bit in terms of, well, how big is the burning platform we have to do something better or different with our ERP? And as you do that, help me explain to the audience, how do we measure that? How do we put a baseline to it? So with that, let's jump into the first area for diagnostic, where you talk about operational drift. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. And that leans into, you kind of alluded to it in your introduction, which is if you were walking a shop floor of a manufacturing facility and you looked around, you'd see a lot of busyness going on, a lot of people sitting in front of their computer screens. Obviously, those that are in the manufacturing will be on the shop floor producing products. But the hidden things that people don't always see is if you look at what's on the screen, it's more often a spreadsheet than the ERP.
Mm.
If you see people sitting around in the office, past 4 or 5 p.m. in the afternoon and stressing out and trying to get the manufacturing throughput to be increased or to actually just get today's schedule out, right? Those frustrations, those heroics, those spreadsheets, those are all the things that creep in over time from the time of the implementation of the ERP. And it all stems back to something called the implementation trap, is when you implement this technology just to get it to go live. That's usually the measure of success of any ERP. Hey, let's make sure it goes live, the data is accurate, we've trained our people, and we can ship the product. It's a pretty low bar, but that's usually what the executives or even the boardroom would say. Don't make sure it does not impact our customer. What that means is that then over time, we don't put enough time into data quality, ongoing governance, ongoing education. We don't allow for true change management to occur. So we kind of let people to fall back to old habits, old ways, old behaviors, which creates more spreadsheets and customizations. And that's this notion of operational drift. Over time, very quietly and gently, over time, you find that the company drifts away from where they were designed to actually perform and function. And of course, a lot changes along the way. People change, business change, processes change. And all we do is we just keep compounding the operational drift. And so what happens is that becomes a very costly component. And again, because it happens slowly, there's no big explosion, there's no big bang that nobody can go like, okay, here's the issue. It happens gently. And over time, we just add costs. We add buffer. So we buffer in inventory, we buffer in time, we put a few extra lead time steps in place, we buffer in people, all these costs. And these hidden costs is what ultimately starts strangling organizations around margin erosion, working capital, and cash flow, right? And so to come back to your original question, that's the implication of the operational drift. How do you see it? Probably one of the easiest ways to notice that is just walk the floor and see how many people are in spreadsheets as opposed to the ERP.
Okay. So what kind of number am I looking for? 1 out of 10 in spreadsheets, 9 out of 10 in spreadsheets. What's the number that suggests maybe we're not using our ERP effectively? You have a gauge for that or some way of kind of measuring that challenge?
Well, what we do know is that 9 out of 10 companies are saying that they are not getting the value out of their ERP. 9 out of 10. Actually, as a matter of fact, it's 94% of companies say they're not getting the value. And when we go in and do actual detailed diagnostics, drill into the system analysis and get into the standard reports and look at how well the system is being used, we find that organizations are underutilizing, in this particular case, SAP, by as little as 35%. So that means 65% of the system capability is underutilized. And the reality is that's, again, could probably be extrapolated. So how do you measure that? Usually, if you look at it from a transactional perspective, people will be pretty active in their transactions because they have to. I have to have a purchase order to buy something. I have to have a production order to make something. I need a sales order to sell something. Transactionally, those things will be in place because accounting needs that. But what you find is that people are manually manipulating that data. They're not letting the system manage it for them. So they are managing the transactions rather than managing the rules to manage the business. And when you start managing the rules, meaning what are the right lead times? What are the right MRP strategies? What are the right planning strategies? What is the right forecast? What is the right capacity? What's the right run rates? You start managing that more actively, not just when you went live, that one time that was adjusted. Then you can actually start managing the rules to manage a business. And so when you start looking at the number of how many people are doing that, if you look around the shop floor, you'll probably find a lot of people are actually on spreadsheets. And as I said, 9 out of 10 companies feel that way. So I would extrapolate that you probably will see between 8 and 9 out of 10 people will be in spreadsheets.
All right. So let me ask a couple of questions. So as you're talking there, I'm thinking about how would I measure that, get a sense for, how much drift we've had.
Mm-hmm.
And right off the bat, I think about people that do planning, right? Planning and
Yep.
scheduling.
Yep.
So of your hours per week you spend planning and scheduling, how much of that is working in spreadsheets?
Yep.
And how much of that time is actively working inside your given ERP system? Would that be a way to gauge your exposure?
They would. So in a good environment or a great environment, you would find that people would be planning and analyzing inside of SAP almost all the time. Because if something happens, they can very quickly do a capacity evaluation and allow the system to reschedule things based on the rules that they've defined. So if something changes, they just merely have to drag and drop the change and everything reapplies. The material staging gets reallocated, the purchasing gets adjusted, etc. But what happens is, as you said, is they would tend to move to their spreadsheet. So 80% of the time, they're living in their spreadsheet. Now, what the implication is, the ERP becomes blind to what they're doing in their silo world. So that silo information is now their decision-making tool. And then they're going to tell SAP what they did. And then nobody really knows beyond that what's happened. And so the system starts breaking down. The integration breaks down. So here's a really good measure. Something called exceptions. So SAP and most ERPs, when something's off, dates are off, quantities are off, something needs to be rescheduled, the system throws up an exception, an alert if you want. Think of it like your iPhone notifications. Hey, Mr. User, something's off, you need to schedule you need to adjust. Labor shortage issues, scheduling issues, maintenance breakdown issues, something's off. Material is not available, etc. So if you're living in the system, these exceptions become alerts. You can say, oh, I need to do something about this. So I've got 4 different things I can do, right? I can either fix the actual transaction itself, like change the date or do something about it, or it's actually a rule that's wrong. The lead time's off, the quantity's off, the run rate's off, something's off, I got to go change the rule. Or my data is inaccurate, meaning transactional data. So I have an old sales order that's driving a requirement to make something that's not needed anymore. So there's a transactional integrity. And then lastly, the process could be just broken, right? So that becomes what I would be as a scheduler. I would be looking at these 4 things when I saw an alert.
Right.
Now, the challenge is, and this is where you come back to your number, most organizations, because they're not living in that world in a real-time exception basis, these exceptions accumulate over time. And if you take a snapshot at any given time, you will have a new set of exceptions because every day things move. Supply chains move, businesses move, things change. That's real. You should expect some exceptions. But we see companies with thousands of exceptions. So here's a simple rule. If a user has more than 1,000 exceptions against their particular work role or materials for a particular day, they have no control over their environment and they're not living in SAP or in the ERP.
Yep. So what's a healthy number, right? So for that, I was actually going exactly where you're going because I see this happen, right? Where the exceptions get so bad, we just stop paying attention to them.
Right.
Right. We just have to stop. And there's lots of reasons for the exceptions, right? We're not maintaining lead times. Therefore, it's giving us exceptions that are invalid. It's telling us we need to expedite when we really don't.
Yep.
Or, that goes on. The other application that I'm a big believer in is using planning bills and some way of doing sales, inventory, and operations planning, and basically using some form of planning bills to forecast out expected growth, entry of markets, different products going up, going down, and allowing that to resize and rebalance inventories and capacity as we're looking out into the forecast. Well, if the planning bills are junk and they have bad lead time offsets, they have, incorrect bill of material usages, et cetera, or even the wrong stuff, then they become invalid and unusable and not usable either. So what's a healthy load of daily exceptions for the average planner, scheduler whose job it is to keep everything square? What would be a healthy level of exceptions?
Yeah, I love that question. We get that quite often, you can imagine. Like, what do my peers do, right? And everything you just mentioned, I just want to come back to it. Everything you talked about between lead times and scheduling and rates and stuff like that, those are what we refer to as business rules. These are the master data settings that determine how this material is going to function, right? And so you can plan and do what if scenarios. So what's a healthy number of exceptions? Oh, Myron, if I have a penny for every time I've heard that question, right? So the challenge, of course, is that businesses are different and unique and have slightly different challenges. But what we would say is, if you're able to get through your exceptions for the day, and that could be 10, that could be 100, that could be 200, right? But but it's within that range of like, I can actually work through it in a day. So whenever an MRP run happens or there's any kind of misalignment and exception occurs, I have the ability to work through it. That's usually a good average sign that you're on top of the exceptions. And those are usually in that 1 to 200 range, maybe 300 range. We've actually seen buyers and planners and schedulers manage thousands of materials. So it's not even a number of material issue, because often people are like, well, how many materials should somebody manage then? It's not even about that. We've seen companies, one person manage 5,000 to 10,000 materials because they know how to manage them, because they're managing the system to manage the rules and the process. But there could be people that have 10 materials and feel overwhelmed because they don't have the control over it. So the number of exceptions is usually low hundreds, but the predominant statement would be can you get through them in a day? That's probably the accurate level.
So then the next metric would be, how do I benchmark the organization in terms of, for every X thousands of SKUs, how many planner schedulers should I have in a typical well-run? Now, this is right here. It's well-run. We have good business rules. Exceptions will happen. We need them to happen because stuff happens, right? Machines break down, suppliers miss a delivery, customer drops in, a spiky order. That's the reality of being in business, right? You got to deal with that. So that's expected. You are going to have exceptions.
That's right.
Unless you happen to be in the automotive industry and you can freeze your production schedule for the next 12 months and never vary by 1% a day, then maybe you don't have to be so good at it. But most of us don't live in that world.
Not at all.
So what I'm trying to get a sense for is, how do I know I've got 10 times as many people as I should have because we're way overloaded on exceptions. It's out of whack. Right? I mean, how do you get a flavor for that as a metric?
Well, I'm going to answer your question in two ways. I'm going to tell you a story first, and then I'll share a better metric that may be more helpful for people. Right. The first one is we worked with a company in Chicago, and they had 40 buyers. They were running SAP. They've been running it for 10 years. And every buyer only had to handle a handful of materials because it was so overwhelming, too many exceptions, didn't understand how it works, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Underutilizing the technology and all that. So after 3 months of teaching them how it's supposed to work, fixing and updating the master data effectively, and using exceptions in a way that allows them to do continuous improvement. So use the exceptions to manage the rules, to manage the business, right?
Yep.
Within 3 months, they started seeing an inventory reduction, which is the metric that will be more helpful over time, very slowly, but then started seeing it grow to the point that after a 9-month period, so after 3 months, they started seeing the change. After 9 months, they had saved $42 million in inventory, optimized. So sometimes it increased, sometimes it reduced because they had to make those adjustments. Right. Optimized 42 million improvement. Their buyer count went from 40 to 8 people.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That is very interesting. It sounds like, another form of cycle counting, because I've always been an advocate of cycle counting. If you're doing it just to keep the records accurate, go shoot yourself, right? You need to do cycle counting to discover causation and continually work on eliminating the root causes for record accuracy problems. And if we're doing cycle counting, but we're not closing the loop with corrective actions, shame on us, right? It's a huge missed opportunity to optimize. So it sounds like just, another cut at the same kind of mindset.
Very much so. But one of the things that we got to be careful for with people, because often we think we know there's an opportunity to optimize in the people usage side of things. And I agree, there's ways to smooth that out. But often the bigger impact, which is the dollar count that I mentioned earlier regarding the inventory, is something called dead stock. Dead stock isn't obsolete. It's not the stock that hasn't moved for 2 years. Dead stock is the inventory that doesn't turn in an active material. So the material's moving every day. We're buying and selling, we're making whatever it is, but there's a level from, in the bottom of the barrel that we never adjust. That's called dead stock. What we find is that when the number of exceptions increase, so when people are out of control, they don't have control over the systems, the exceptions are overwhelming, dead stock increases. Because dead stock is an easy way to fill for the gaps, right? Just hold a little more in this material. Just hold a little more in this finished good, semi-finished good, or raw material, whatever it is. And so over time, we find, so a good measure is when there's excessive exceptions, you'll find there will be excessive dead stock. And when we're talking excessive, we're talking about sometimes as much as 50% of the average inventory is not turning on active materials, not obsolete, active, usable, sellable materials.
I believe it.
And that's where a lot of the cash is trapped. Yeah.
Exactly. So with respect to operational drift, anything else you want to touch on before we shift to the next diagnostic?
Just that's really that's kind of the definition of the enemy, right? That's causing businesses to lose it. The outcome is, as I mentioned, the working capital, the cash. There's a profit and margin erosion happening as well because of the increased cost component of it. But more importantly, it is a big scalability challenge. So when companies are trying to scale, it's harder because the only way they can do it is add more people. They can't scale
or inventory or whatever.
Or inventory. Right. And then you slap AI on top of this, and we were talking about that earlier, and it draws all this data from this poor ERP system, and it's supposed to predict. All it's doing is accelerating the chaos, through the business. And what we're going to find is the businesses, I think McKinsey's most recent statistic is that less than 39% of companies are actually seeing any benefit yet out of agentic AI because it's drawing from poor data components and bad behavior. And so it's just really predicting poorly and therefore not giving them the opportunity.
It's replicating a bad business process, basically.
Hey, it's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, right? We're old enough, you and I, to know that statement is still true today. Even with AI potentially being able to help improve data integrity, for sure, and rule management, there's still an underlying component of human behavior that is going to determine how well that goes. And accountability resides at the human level. It doesn't end at the system. You can't hold the system accountable. You can only hold the human accountable.
Yep, I like that. Well, let's pivot then to that second area of diagnostic. I think something around data trust and signal integrity. Tell us more about how we measure that and determine if we have a challenge.
Yeah, that's another pretty easy way to do from a systematic perspective. That's what we refer to as transactional excellence or data integrity, as you mentioned. So what that usually you see in ERPs is a lack of discipline of closing out transactions, meaning we don't close active sales orders or purchase orders or production orders or goods receipts or warehouse movements. And so these things remain open. And SAP and most ERPs are rules engines. So they look at the rule and they say, okay, take the rule, take the data, and give me a recommendation, right? Now, again, no different than future AI, right? Rule, data, recommendation. So now the rules we've already talked about the rules and exceptions that causes. So let's assume the rules are correct. Now the system looks at all these transactions and there's a sales order from 2 years ago. There's a purchase order from 5 years ago that's still open. Don't worry, you don't need to buy anything. You have a PO that's coming in 2 years ago. And of course, the ERP keeps saying, well, if it's 2 years, it's open for 2 years, it's going to come tomorrow. So it just assumes it comes the next day. And so it basically is not throwing up an alert because it says, I have enough. At least I'm going to have enough here today, tomorrow.
Yeah, the on hand and on order is enough. Therefore, we don't have a problem when in fact nothing is on order. And then on the flip side of it, we have an open we have an open sales order saying I'm going to sell it when maybe I'm not. So I'm
That,
making something I don't need to make at all because there is no order to sell it against. So
that's
it's a
right.
double whammy, right? So it hits you on both sides of it.
For sure. And the worst are the sales orders, right? Because it keeps saying, hey, I need demand. So the supply keeps trying to make stuff to meet this 2-year-old sales order that's out there. And so you're making more. So that's the cost component. And then to your point about having a PO that's open or a production order that's open, you're going to miss a real customer demand. And then you're having customer failure. And so to measure that becomes really important. So one of the fun things to do when you do an ERP analysis to just say, how many open transactions do we have? And I cannot tell you, I would say probably most companies we do a diagnostic for, we find that they will have one, if not more, of these elements, these open documents from go live. So they've gone live in SAP 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and there'll be a PO from 2012 or 2013, right? It's just a reality. And because of that, data integrity and the lack of discipline and the fact that people don't realize it's part of their job to close these things out, you just end up with dirty, clutter, if you want. And I
Right.
kind of liken it to dirty oil in a car. At some point, the engine seizes up, right?
Agree. So what would be a healthy level of open transactions? I know it's going to depend, right?
Yeah.
Total transactions, the typical lead time within which, customer sales order comes in and exits out as being closed. So there's lots of moving pieces to it. So there's no easy answer to it. But as a ratio, is there a ratio, a healthy ratio? Any
Yeah.
metric that you've figured out over the years on this one?
Yeah, and to your point, sometimes they are genuinely late, right? I mean, those are the things
Right.
you also have to accept. So what we like to refer to is not necessarily a ratio, because again, it depends on data and number of materials,
Right.
etc. But what we like to say is in a good to great supply chain or operational environment, none of your transactions should be older than 7 days. Like a week old is a good state to be in.
Okay.
As soon as it goes beyond that, it starts depleting and degrading everything around you: processes, data integrity, decision making, rules engines, etc. The sad part is we see people going back years, right? And so
Right.
the general rule of thumb is clean that up systematically to a certain point, to maybe 1 to 2 years away, and then use the old ones to teach the teams and create a new discipline within them to maintain it on a daily basis, to keep it within a week period.
Okay. Anything else around this data trust and signal integrity before we move on to the third diagnostic?
Yeah, I would just say again, thinking of customer service levels, ATP, available to promise, which is one of the most critical measures in an ERP to be able to provide, success to a customer, is this thing called ATP. And if you think of Amazon's trained us all, right? I can order 10 gadgets from them, and they'll tell me that I can get 8 tomorrow, but the other 2 still have to come in a week's time. I'd
Right.
probably accept that. That's available to promise. I have 8 available now, but I can give you 2 later in a week from now. But they'll give me a date for that. I'll accept that as an achievable date and then, but I'm going to hold them to that date, a week from now for those 2. When you have these data integrity issues, that causes ATP to fail constantly because it's promising on bad data. It's promising on old POs and old production orders or incorrect POs and production orders or sales orders and on all the related documents. And so the customer service impact of poor transactional excellence is enormous. So much so that companies then don't know how to solve for it. And so then they start just giving standard lead times as answers. Hey, Mr. Customer, when you want it tomorrow, sorry, I can only give it to you on a 2-week basis because all our orders are 2 weeks, take 2 weeks. That's the most, what's the right word for this, Ron?
Yeah, self-limiting, basically.
Self-limiting and silliest way to solve for the problem, right? Because now you're not really making yourself agile. You're not becoming a competitive advantage. You're just basically saying, I can
Yeah,
only give
you're
it in
just
2 weeks.
throwing more material and more orders into the funnel, whether you need them or not.
That's right. That's right. So huge cost to the
Interesting.
business. Yep.
Very interesting. All right. Well, cool. Then you had a third diagnostic I'm interested in learning more about. You call it business maturity and operating discipline. How do we understand that and kind of get a baseline and understand if we have a gap?
Yeah. So business maturity by definition means how mature are we as a business to use the technology we have to achieve our goals. So this is not about buying more software. This is not how mature you are as a business. Some of these businesses are 100 years old, right? It's more how well are we using the technology to meet our goals. We have a 5-level maturity continuum, which you can find on our website. And there's actually a self test as well to do. And we can put that probably in the chat and the link as well for everybody who's listening. But basically, it's a 5-level maturity. And the goal is if you're living in the level 5, you're setting goals and you're achieving them because you can optimize for that. When you're in level 3, which is a rule-based system, it says my rules don't reflect reality. Then you're in level 2, I don't have the transactional excellence we just talked about. And if I live in level 1, I don't even have a single source of truth. I have so many spreadsheets and so many customizations. I don't even have a core. So stability, data integrity, rules, optimization, business value. And so organizations that are able to stay in 4 and 5 are in that perfect continuous improvement state because they can see the new target, optimize for it, and keep going in that continuous movement, the cycle, right? Companies that find themselves in 1, 2, or 3 are stuck. And they'll always remain stuck. They'll never achieve a high level performance unless they move through those continuums into the optimization state naturally.
So I've got 2 questions. How is that model you just described, maturity model, how is that the same or different from the famous Gartner model?
I think Gartner looks at it from a different perspective. They look at it from a complexity perspective, and they try to measure it against how complex you are as a business. And I think there is some validity to that for sure, right? I mean, the problem is that what we've defined here is independent of complexity. Because even if you're a simple business, just a buy-sell business versus a super complicated manufacturer, if you're in 1, 2, or 3, you're stuck, no matter how complex your business is. If you're not able to get through creating a single source of truth, get rid of the spreadsheets, customizations, get your data integrity in place. So within a week's worth of data integrity, make sure your transactional excellence is in place. My rules reflect reality, lead times, bills of material, run rates, etc., actually reflect reality. Then it doesn't really matter how complex you are. Your operational drift will just continue to just get worse and worse if you're in those first 3 continuum.
All right. So the assessment tool you're offering is nothing like the Gartner model. It kind of looks the same on a piece of paper, right? You might have this, graphic, right, kind of pivoting or some kind of a visual view, but the assessment model you're talking about is entirely different, and it's much more, I'm going to say, granular with respect to the data and the information you need to have accessible. And it's a different way of looking at maturity. Okay,
Yes.
good. So I want to understand that.
And Ron, just to add to that, because I think this is helpful for your audience, it's also not just a measure. Like with Gartner, I think it's just a measure. It says, hey, you here, right? You need to know where you are, but it just gives you a pinpoint. This is a continuum. It's not a 4-quadrant, it's a 5-level maturity continuum. And so it's really a roadmap. So it allows you to not only pinpoint where you're at in the 1 through 5, it then says, okay, where do I need to focus my attention? And then what's the next step? And what's the next step? And what's the next step to get to that 5? And that's where I think it becomes super helpful for organizations to know where they're at, because then they have that as a guide and a roadmap to get to the business value they're looking for.
Okay. So imagining that part of that maturity model helps us, think about the use of, the ERP, the SAP for execution versus reporting only, and then tying it to financial outcomes. That's pretty interesting.
Yes.
I wanted to ask a question. Something jumped into my head. I'm thinking about fairly complex organizations with lots of different product lines, serving lots of different markets. Now, I'm imagining the level of maturity might vary depending on which product line we're talking about. Have you run into that? And here's where I'm going with it. I'm thinking about a company and they've got 100,000 SKUs, right? 25 product lines and 10 different markets and blah, blah, blah. And if I'm sitting there looking at this, well, that's just like an overwhelming massive pile of a mess, right? It's a huge mess.
Yeah.
Would you advocate taking a slice of it? In other words, 80-20 rule. What 20% of the product or 80% of revenue? And they can keep it simple. Or what's a particular product line or market that if we could get that cleaned up super fast, we could accelerate to maturity and really begin to drive some real value back in the organization? Would you advocate trying to fix the entire mess at one time, or would you advocate taking a slice and basically iterating through it to learn and improve and then come back and cascade lessons learned? How would you advocate?
I love that question. That is such a good question because it's actually a combination of the two. And let me share why.
Okay.
Because you talk about maturity from a complexity perspective, that's true. But we even find maturity in related to different functions. So procurement may be more mature than production, and sales may be less mature than warehousing. So you do need to look at it from a holistic perspective. That's where I say you got to look at the whole, because you got to raise the level of the maturity of the entire organization at the same time. However,
Right.
you don't want to, then you want to start eating the elephant one bite at a time. So you got to raise the level of knowledge and raise the level of maturity in the sense that everybody understands the end-to-end implications. But you start with an 80-20 for sure. You go, here's the 20, here's the 20% that's affecting 80% of my business. Let's focus on those and let's iterate from there. But let's iterate everybody, not just sales, not just manufacturing. Let's get everybody to iterate. That creates confidence, quick wins, and then the confidence continues to build on top of each other, and you mature through that continuum that we talked about very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's making complete sense to me. And talk to me more about accountability for planning and execution decisions and how you baseline that as part of that assessment part. How do you do that part? That really caught my eye in your notes here. I'm interested in understanding how do you baseline that and measure your current state of accountability and planning for execution, operationalizing. How do you measure that one? That one caught my attention.
Right. So we've kind of touched on some of them already, but what we try to do is we pull a baseline set of KPIs, operational KPIs, not just the goal posts around inventory and service levels. Like, what are the operational metrics that's going to matter for making sure we go through the continuum? This doesn't take away from schedule attainment and other operational metrics that make sense to businesses. So we, in our case, because we've fundamentally use SAP or work with SAP run companies, and again, from a business perspective, this is not an IT discussion, of course, we help them draw baselines per person. So when we come to accountability, we'll say, okay, Ron, how many exceptions do you have? How many transactions are overdue? What's your master data look like? And we'll benchmark all of that. And then we will, as you go through your education and you learn how to use it, you go through the iterative process we just talked about, we then look at how those metrics are getting better. If my exceptions are coming down, my transactional excellence is going up, my master data is becoming more accurate and optimized, the inventory and the material will start slowing down. It stabilizes, becomes more predictable, the noise starts going away, and we measure it in the system. So we don't want to have another spreadsheet. We use standard reports that are fundamentally built into these ERPs. People just don't know they exist. And then look at these operational metrics to see are the individuals are accountable to them, and are we getting better at it? But is the business overall getting better as well? So accountability is key. Again, we said earlier, you can only hold people accountable. Systems just follow what they're told, right?
Right. Completely makes sense. All right, cool. So let's pivot. The audience at this point is probably nodding their heads thinking, yep, I either know I have a problem or I suspect I have a problem. And I probably do need to go and assess and really understand where we're at. And you've got a handy tool to help them with that. So let's pretend that, yes, in fact, they've got a burning platform. We have these as challenges. What's your sage advice? What do we go do? I mean, we've touched on several things already, right? Like figuring out your level of maturity across the various functions, doing the 80-20 rule, where to start first. That's kind of the go-do part. Yeah, let's pivot and just basically dive in and say, what do we do? What's your sage advice for the audience? So, yes, in fact, these three areas we talked about are a challenge. What do you do?
Yeah. So there's a fundamental underlying challenge to all of the things we talked about, and that is we don't know what we don't know. So you're talking to a user team who's been living this way now for the last 10, 15 years. They hire somebody new, they tell them how the new process is. You got to run this transaction and then you email it to this guy and then you download that spreadsheet and then you teams them over here and then you see it. That's the process, right? And so companies don't know a different way. And they live in a bubble. We talk about they need to look beyond the bubble. So often they need to learn how to raise the level of education in their teams. It's a knowledge-based challenge for sure. So the biggest knowledge gap is usually I don't know what I need to know to do my job the most effectively. I was told I need to run these 3 transactions, and that's all you need to know, and I only got those access. You remember, those days, you're like, the 3 things you can do, that's it. So if I need to do more, I got to do it somewhere else in a spreadsheet or something. So you expose the team to more capabilities. You educate them on what good looks like and how they can do their job in the system. And you ultimately then wrap that with a change management component that says it's okay to change. It's okay to do this. It's not going to break. You can change your lead time live in the system. It's okay, right? You don't have to go and adjust it somewhere else. And just that confidence of trying to raise this competence within the team. And so it's all about competence and capabilities. And we take typically companies through a pretty sophisticated educational program and certify them, et cetera, with the eye of optimizing for business value.
All right. So I think there you're really getting at the operational drift, right? Limiting
That's right.
parallel planning tools is in there, shifting teams to exception-based management versus today's chaos. So just picking which fight we're going to make today because that
That's right.
particular customer is making the most noise, right?
Perfect.
What about this? What do we do about the data trust problem?
Oh, I mean, that's actually one of the big things we have to work on pretty quickly. Because again, if with a rules-based engine that changes every day, it says, here's what's the daily change, what's late, what's behind, what's happened. We need to teach the teams to use the exceptions as a signal to go and address one of the root causes. And one of the root causes is the data integrity piece. So go in and go update the dates, change the quantities, make sure you've corrected it, make sure it reflects what's actually happening. If a supplier is late, he's late. Make sure production knows about it. Don't just send them an email saying, hey, this material is going to be late, but don't update the PO. You got to update the PO date, right? Because MRP is going to run again and it's going to tell you something else. So it becomes a daily discipline that needs to be embedded. So we start building something called a governance structure that becomes really important, an operational governance model. So there's a daily governance model with the teams that are on the coalface working every day on these things. What are the metrics they're looking at and how do they make sure they're solving for the problem? Because guess what? Because it's an integrated supply chain and operations, it's never just you that can solve it. Often we need other people. Like customer service has to do something or warehouse has to change something. And so we have to create a cross-functional, process-aligned team governance model that then is able to work with the day-to-day challenges of the day together, right? Looking at one set of data, one system of truth. When they are stuck, there needs to be a next level, typically at a director level or so, that says, okay, I'm looking at trends. I'm looking at seeing where the other challenges are that we have to potentially look. You can think of them as tier meetings as well. And then the last one would be an executive governance, which is, hey, there's an operational model consideration to change here, or there's a policy that we may need to rethink because obviously policies reflect in the system rules, right? And so we have this governance model that has to be put in place because otherwise, again, you can raise the education of everybody, but if you don't keep it together with some kind of glue, people slowly but surely kind of drift again and go back to old ways, right?
Exactly. So I want to interrupt with a question. It's a little off tangent to go a little bit sideways here, but I'm thinking about the heavy lifting that happens. I need to go in and start getting everything cleaned up. Well, that's a lot of transactional things. Have you
Yeah.
seen success with some application of AI at that level, some kind of human in the loop enabler of applying AI down? Now I'm talking deep in the trenches at the individual contributor sweating their 500 parts or whatever it
Yeah.
is, right? Have you seen success with careful and carefully orchestrated use of AI to accelerate the speed of making those adjustments?
I,
I'm
I
just
wouldn't
curious.
say
I'm curious. I'm
yeah.
curious.
Yeah. So I would say answer it this way. We haven't seen a meaningful improvement from an AI perspective, but systematically, yes, of course, you could do it now. You can just write a program and let it go clean up the old transactions, right? There's ways for the system to do that. The challenge that you'll face is even with AI being able to do that down the road,
Right.
is that if you don't change the fundamental premise and behavior of the individual, it'll just come back again. So what we
Yeah.
often see is companies go off and systematically clean it up, or they do some SWAT team and they put them together and they go, okay, for the next 6 months, clean, clean, clean. And then 6 months later, it's all back again. And the
Right.
reason is because you didn't fundamentally change where the root of the actual
Right.
accountability is happening, right? Which is the person creating the transaction and owning the transaction hasn't managed that effectively enough. And so that's where the human in the loop is going to be so important, because it becomes a, a human empowered process, right?
Right. Cool. Very cool. So, what else would you offer as advice? I think you already got into this third area around, developing maturity, right? Stabilizing execution, clear decision ownership, right? Driving it back to the financial outcomes and better discipline. And that all completely makes sense. What else should we be thinking about, or what should we be doing that you haven't covered yet in your mind, that short list of go do's?
Yeah. I think this becomes a leadership discussion, Ron. And I feel, what I see often people from an executive perspective says, we've invested in the tool. Now the people just need to go make it work. Right? We've done our job, right? We've done our job. We spent $100 million, sometimes as much as that, implementing this technology. They should now just make it happen. And they don't necessarily recognize the need to invest in the people. So you invest in the technology, great. But now you actually have to invest in the people to make the technology really hum for you. And no AI is going to fix that. No chat GPT is going to answer your questions sufficiently. You actually have to start educating and investing in the people component. Even if it's a reduced version of people, I mean, those adjustments will happen. Technology does create efficiencies, but you still need to create critical thinking. And critical thinking only comes from learning by doing. And this is
Yep.
key for us. Key. I can teach you how to drive a car, but you're never going to know how to drive a car until you drive the car, right?
Yep. That's a
And
fact.
that's a fact. And I know that because I had two teenage girls went through that exact phase. And so I know for a fact we all did, right? And the reality that we have to realize is we're talking about adults here that are professional people working that have to be taught again how to do things differently. And getting leaderships to recognize that there's a value in that is very difficult, because they can see the tangible value in the technology. And that's why AI is so profound and why people love it. I'm all for it, right? In terms of its ability to create efficiencies. But it's not a silver bullet or an easy button, right? It's not going to just change the critical thinking and the human in the loop concept. And so we really do need to help leaders and executives recognize that the true value in the next evolution of their business is critical thinking and raising the level of knowledge in the humans so they can deploy the technology more effectively.
I agree with that. And something I've said for many years, I think back to all the years I was implementing ERP systems. And since then, the last 25 years, working with various companies, helping them, take it to the next level, get better utilization. And the analogy I would use is if I had a choice between the best ERP system with all the best bells and whistles, with people who may or may not really understand to use it,
Mm-hmm.
or a relatively rudimentary, simple system with people who are highly understand what to do and highly motivated to have a great process, I'm going to take the latter every single time.
Me too.
Yeah, I can put up with, maybe some cool functionality and whatever would be nice to have, but if I get buried in all the minutia and I become ineffective, what good is that? So I'm always more in favor of simple technology, strong people is going to way outperform the other mix every time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's simple technology and standardized processes and streamlined data all day over complicated technology. That's why a lot of these advanced planning systems that people have been implementing recently, and I won't name the vendors per se, but anything regarding sales and operations planning, IVP, anything related to some sophisticated planning models, forecasting models, they're great technologically, right? I mean, they're super sophisticated, but they all come down to how good is my data, how good are my rules, and how well am I able to use the data for insights and decisions. And if that part is still flawed, then none of the technology is really going to help us.
All right. Martin, that's perfect. Let's get into wrap up now. That was great. Let's pretend, people are enjoying what you have to say. They want to get in touch with you, learn more, pick your brain or whatever. How do they get in touch with you?
I would say the easiest is just find me on LinkedIn, Martin Rowan at Reveal. And of course, the website is revealvalue.com. But that's probably the easiest. I'm all over the website and stuff. We have a team of people that can reach out to pretty much anybody. We have a global footprint. We're based in Chicago. Most of our customers are North America based, but we have a global footprint. So it's easy to find us. But that's probably the easiest way to get hold of me.
Good job. Thank you so much.
Hey, Ron, I really appreciate it. It's nice to do this with you. And I know we have a passion that's very similar about companies maximizing what they have to get the performance they're looking for. And so I appreciate the time as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of MetaPod and hope that you would like it. Make others aware that this is available as a resource. We have quite a library of content built up over the years and always looking for great presenters who have great stuff they'd like to share about these 3 common challenges as well. You can reach out to me on our website as well. So with that, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.